guys. We are back to finish chapter 3 of Genesis. So we ended on Genesis verse 18, which was talking about eating from the field. You know, if you think about it, not only was Eve given the idea of the seed that was going to be in her and the enemy's seed, but also here Adam's dealing with seeds. Because in order to grow from the earth, you have to have seed. And I love the example that goes all the way back to Genesis that takes us all the way through, because it's also another foreshadowing of Jesus. Because it requires, to have new life requires death, right? In the woman, as she's giving birth, there are things dying, right? The placenta, you have things that are dying in order to give birth. And even here, in the planting idea that Adam's planting the seeds, the seed actually dies in order for the new growth to come forth, right? That's required. It's a cycle, just like the cycle of life has now become in order for Adam and Eve to live. So let's start with verse 19. It says, by the sweat of your face, you are to eat bread until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, from dust you are, and to dust you shall return. So if you've ever heard that at a funeral, here you go. I don't know why we always say that at a funeral. It's not really a cheery thing, but it is true that that is the plan that we have been given once Adam sinned and created separation. So here again is that idea of the dust. You're going to go back to the dust. The serpent's eating the dust. You're going to be growing from the dust. Both of you, all of you, are going to be involved with the seed and with dust and with death. All right. So again, that toiling, you're going to have to really work for it. All right, let's go to verse 20. And the man called his wife and named her what we call Eve. I cannot say the Hebrew here, so we're going to stick with Eve. Because she became the mother of all living. Okay. If you notice, here is when Eve, though I've been saying Eve, she was the wife, the woman. You notice now we have a name, Eve, but she didn't have a name prior. Because again, remember that oneness? It was the male and female, the man and the woman, but they worked as one. There was no division of name and name. It was husband, wife. That was the role of man and woman. But now, because of the fall, and there's more of a separation, they've been separated from God, and their oneness is separated, because now, remember, we have the Adam as head, Eve. We have it working with different dynamics, all right? These dynamics now, Adam is naming her, giving her an individual name that is separate from Adam. If we remember, Adam didn't name himself. The living God named Adam. And then he knew he was man. He knew what his species was. I keep saying species. Let's just go with that one because I don't remember if there's something, if it's kingdom or there's something bigger. So we're going with species. I apologize for all you science buffs if I am misusing that. So he knew his species, man. And of that woman. But of the same species, right? Both human beings. And now we have where he's like, okay, but now we're separate. So you're Eve. You're the mother of all living things. She was always going to be the mother of all living things. Always. Because she gives birth. And by all living things, I mean humans. Okay? She's not a mother to a sheep. She's mother to, I guess she would be, in a way, a mother to the Lamb of God when Jesus is born. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about. We're going to have here where she has a separate name. And now she's given the name Eve. This is interesting. If God named Adam, gave him a name as man, and now Adam in this new headship position is giving her a name, a personal name. They're still working together. They're still man and wife. They still are one. But again, now he's naming her. All right. And this is not the perverted idea that we have of woman get 10 feet behind me, do that. That's not scriptural. That's a man's tradition. Okay. That is not what the Lord is condoning or saying here. But Adam understands his role of protection. He's feeding, he's providing for them. used to, they worked together. Now he's the provider. He's got a lot on his plate, okay? And now he's naming her. All right, he's taking her under. When you give birth, when parents have a child, they're not naming a child because they're like, oh, I'm going to rule over you. They're naming a child because they love the child, and they give a name, supposed to give a name, according to the characteristics that you might see in a child. It used to be very common that a child was born and before circumcision wouldn't have a name for 8 days, a male, because you would wait and kind of see a feel for the child, and then its final name was decided during circumcision for some characteristics. So same here, he sees a characteristic. He already knows of it, and that's what he names her. So let's move to verse 21. It says, and Yoveh Elohim, still the merciful, loving creator. Thank God. You notice he's dealing mercifully with man. All right. And Yoveh Elohim made coats of skin for the man and his wife and dressed them. You notice that he didn't say Adam and Eve. He still sees them in their role of man and wife, which means he's still seeing them function as one. So while Adam now has this new responsibility that's a little bit greater than what it was, and Eve has a little different responsibility too, they still are working as one, as man and wife. That didn't change. And if we remember in chapter 2, when the Lord brings them together, he says, this is why you're going to cling, because you're going to be one, right? And Adam even recognizes it. Let's go back real quick and look at that. It says, well, he names him woman, then I apologize. It's 2 verse 24. And that's where the Lord is the one who says, and to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So it's already been set up that they're going to be one flesh. Now, while they're separate, meaning that oneness is changed, they're still functioning in one. That hasn't been removed. And hence, the Lord still recognizes them as man and wife. He doesn't call them by 2 individual names. He's still keeping them as one because they still were in the likeness of God, created like him. Okay, let's move on to verse 22. And the Lord Elohim said, see, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put out his hand and take a hold, or take also, of the tree of life, and eat of it, and live forever. All right. We got a lot going on here. Remember, they're still in the Garden of Eden. It's the perfect place. It's like the Holy of Holies of the temple, right? It's where man and God commune perfectly in a safe place. But now man's not in a safe place because he's not covered. Remember, that's why he tried to cover himself. And the Lord's like, you can't be in here and cover yourself. So out of mercy, he creates, he does skins for them. Now, remember, he's not creating anymore. Okay, he's not creating something new. So we have, how does he get coats of skin? Coats of skin covering. It is probably the very first death right here. Because of Adam and Eve's fall, death does happen the same day. It's just not their death. They don't physically die, but animals physically die. It's a midrash, a thought that maybe a lamb and a ram, the two, were both offered, and those were the skins that they were covered. Think about it. In the wedding, when Jesus talks about the wedding feast, it's only when you have the clothes that he provides for you, that the Father provides for you, that you can come in the wedding. And the gentleman, the person who comes in, who's not dressed appropriately, is told to get out. I mean, he's put into outer darkness. He's not permitted in. Even right here, we have the idea of being clothed. We have to be clothed by the way the Lord set it up, not what we think we should look like. We have to reflect him. So he dresses them. Sin did create death on the same day. So when he said there would be death, he allowed a substitute lamb. Sound familiar? Jesus took on our sins and died so that we could have everlasting life. This animal took on the sins, and I say took on the sins, I guess that wouldn't be right. He provided a new covering by a skin. The Lord created death. And you notice, Adam and Eve didn't kill. The Lord, the Yahweh Elohim, the merciful God, is the one that created the animal that shed its blood to cover Adam and Eve. So he dresses them. But he doesn't dress them to allow them to stay, because again, there's separation, and death isn't allowed in the presence. It's not allowed in the Holy of Holies. It has, the shedding of blood is seen as life. So here when he's killing, creating death to give, it's life, because in the blood is life. I love it. The body, the flesh goes back to the earth, but in the blood is life. So again, there's that separation of life and death being separated when there's physical death. And right here, he's allowing the life to go before him, and he's allowing the leftover, the physical death, to cover man. So even though man's covered by a skin, which represents the death of something, he's allowing that to be what's protecting them in their new state. How great is that? He's not making them create their own covering. He's covering for them. So in a way, you could say this is the first offering, first sacrifice. Another thought is, let's just say that this is the first month, right, we said, of creation. It's very possible that this is a 10-day event, meaning on the 10th day, which is when Yom Kippur, which is when the blood of the two goats are shed, or actually the blood of the goat, I should say, the sin and others released, happens. Right here we have Adam and Eve, who should have been the one who died, but didn't. And we have an animal taking that. And then Adam and Eve are removed. There's your scapegoat. All right. So it just kind of follows about. It's possible that it is Yom Kippur event. And this is another reason, because remember, from Genesis 1:14, all the appointed times are already set in the stars. They're already established. Multiple things happen. The Hebraic calendar moves in a cycle. That's why we have a weekly Sabbath. We have a monthly new moon. We have annual Sabbaths. And then we have 7-year Sabbaths for the land, and then we have a 49-year and a 50-year, and then the cycle. It's a cycle within a cycle within a cycle. I see it like a shell on a snail. Each time it moves and hits a point, it's moving closer and closer to the perfect fulfillment of that Moedim, that appointed time. And so I just put out there as a thought that this is a Yom Kippur event. This is when the shedding of innocent blood is used in order to cover and atone, to cleanse them. That's what's happening in the temple at Yom Kippur. So that for the next year, there can be interaction between the Lord and the people. And they're being kicked out so that they can still survive the interaction with the Lord. They can't handle the Holy of Holies anymore. They got to get out. So the Lord removes them, but covers them. Let's talk about this tree of life. Remember, they could eat from the tree of life. Chapter 2. That was always there for them to eat. It's just not the one they chose. Again, another reason why I'm like, maybe they weren't there that long. Also, they hadn't created. They hadn't given birth yet. There was no babies. Well, if their very first thing was be fruitful and multiply, and they'd been there for years, then they've already fallen, because they would have not fulfilled the scripture. Now, some say that maybe the Lord kept her from getting pregnant. Could be. I mean, definitely, even for the 10 days, right? So, and then there's a thought, maybe she was already pregnant. Maybe she was. But whatever was in her would have taken on the sin from her, because it's born in her likeness. But in my mind, I don't think that the Lord would have allowed something to be created in perfection to then be born into corruption. So I would think, again, this is just Cam, I would think that they did not conceive until after the fall. And the Lord said, don't eat of the tree that's going to preserve you in the form that you're in. Once they fell, they weren't in perfection anymore. There was no protection. Okay, if they had eaten of the tree of life, right, then they would have been sealed in the fallen form. And the Lord's like, we need to get them out. They wanted to take on the responsibility to determine good and evil. Then here's the consequences. I also want you to see that there's no denial here. It says that they too are like us to know good and evil. There's no denial that that's exactly what happened, that they are acting like gods. The problem is they don't have the discernment in order to act properly like gods. And like gods, I don't mean like mythical Zeuses and stuff like that. What I mean is judges. As being able to rightfully judge between good and evil, they lost that ability when they ate of the fruit of good and evil. They lost the ability to naturally produce the ability to determine which one, because they moved away from the likeness of the living God and moved into the likeness of the sinful one. All right, so he's like, let's get him out. Let's also remember that in Revelation 22, in New Jerusalem, which is the idea of the Garden of Eden, what's back? The tree of life. And you know what he says? Eat. Eat of it and it heals. Eat of it and it preserves you in your eternal form. Adam and Eve were in eternal form before they fell. See? Bookends, right? What happens in the beginning happens in the end. If we don't understand the beginning, we don't get the significance of the end. His promise comes full circle. I love it. I love it. All right, so let's go and look at verse 23. It says, so Yoveh Elohim set him out of the garden of Eden, so to till the ground from which he was taken. Okay, here's a thought. Remember, he created man, Genesis 1. He put him in the garden, Genesis 2. Now he's taken him back out and put him back where he was formed. So it's sometimes said that he was actually formed maybe on Mount Moriah, maybe in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, formed, which would mean that the Garden of Eden, which was east of Eden, did not include what would be considered Jerusalem today. If that's the case, if where he was formed, he was put back, then that has to be outside the garden. I do believe it was outside the garden. And so man is put back there to work it. Again, working while hard. It wasn't like a desert. Remember, it all been created perfectly. So everything in the world was in its maturity. And as generations go on, that working becomes harder. All right. So let's go on and end this. So he drove them out. All right. He drove them out. Literally kicked them out. Drove them out. But again, out of mercy, so that we don't end up unredeemable, sealed in our sin. We're not sealed in our sin. That's why second Adam could come, die, and be rose again. Again, remember, before the foundation of time, before the foundation of the earth, it was already understood they were going to get kicked out. So he drove the man out, and he placed cherubim at the east of the garden of Eden. And let's see, I don't have my glasses on. And a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the entrance of the tree. All right, they were being blocked from the garden. They weren't being blocked from. It wasn't like you can't eat of this tree. It was like, no, you'll die if you come and eat this. I mean, you already ate from the other tree. If you now come and eat of the tree that I told you not to eat of now that you've sinned, it's even going to be worse. So I don't even want to have the temptation there. So I'm putting cherubim, two of his really close guys who are around his throne, he puts there. Let's go back to the idea of the Holy of Holies. In the Holy of Holies, there are cherubim there, right? There are cherubim that guard in the Holy of Holies. In the tabernacle, we'll learn about that later. And here, that's what's around the throne. Here, he's putting it. Again, another reason why I see the garden as the Holy of Holies. Because that's where the cherubim work anyway. And he's keeping them because they can't go in without dying. All right, they've got to stay out. But the Lord leaves with them. He still leaves with them. He doesn't stay in the Holy of Holies. He leaves with them. And he will have a relationship with them. It's just going to look a little bit differently. So we have the sword, so they can't go in. He's guarding it. Remember, Man was supposed to guard the garden and he didn't. And so the Lord's like, that's fine. I'll get my other guys to do it. And now they're guarding. And it's in the east. You notice that? On the east gate, which means they couldn't get in any other way. Another hint to it being like the temple. Because there's only one way in, one way out. When you go in any other way, you're a thief and a robber. Only through the door. And that door is Messiah. That's Jesus. Only through the door do you go in rightfully. So they had to go through the east gate to get to the door again, just to get in to go to the Holy of Holies. They had to enter in. And he's like, I'm going to block this. And I love it because on the cherubim, or excuse me, on the veil, going into the Holy of Holies are 2 cherubim. Those cherubim guard the tree of life, which the Torah, the first 5 books that Moses wrote, are called the tree of life. Isn't that cool? They're guarding the tree of life still today. So anyway, we'll end on that. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about, but that's what we're going to end on, and we will follow up with chapter 4 later. Have a great day, and thanks for joining me and spending your time. Bye.